Chapter 93 to 97. Of course not, but... Could you take a look at my soul? My Kyokasu Jetsu, Aizen said, materializing an illusory sword more solid and mysterious than the previous one in his hand, turning it upside down and showing the non-sharp part to Broly. Okay. I have 3 eyes, it won't be difficult for me, Broly replied in a funny serious way. Break Kyokasu Jetsu, Aizen said, disregarding the previous answer, activating the ability of the Bleach's most dangerous Shirkai. And after a few seconds of silence in which neither of them moved or spoke. I'm supposed to have already fallen into your absolute illusion? Broly asked without Aizen giving him an answer. Will you do something next? Broly said, approaching Aizen in a calm but threatening manner, as if he were a robber who had just seen his prey in a dark alley. But suddenly he heard a voice that came from his back, I've been doing something since a few seconds ago. Then the image of Aizen in front of Broly disappeared, breaking as if it were glass, and behind Broly appeared the real Aizen. Broly had been trapped within Aizen's absolute illusion successfully. When someone has seen the release of Kyokasu Jetsu, Aizen's Zancudo, he falls into a state of total hypnosis in which Aizen is able to control the 5 senses of his victims, modifying his perceptions and using all kinds of illusions. You are more problematic than I thought. Not only are you incredibly resilient, it seems that like me you can also regenerate. This will be very difficult, Aizen said, very impressed and even scared. Broly, having been trapped in the illusion, was unable to see it until now, but his clothes were completely destroyed, and Aizen stared stupidly at Broly's shattered clothes, shatters caused by repeated Keto attacks of Aizen, but nonetheless there wasn't a single sequel on Broly's skin. Do you know about my regeneration? Do you know about my feedback? Now you have impressed me. Have you really managed to hurt me? I underestimated you. I felt nothing at all, great illusion. A combination of high-grade Ketos? Broly said, very surprised by Aizen's great achievement, expressing it as if he were a father praising his son who had recently begun to draw something that someone could identify. From the moment of activating his Zanpakuto's ability, Broly had been in a perfect illusion. In this perfect illusion, Aizen was even able to manipulate Broly's sense of touch, so he did not notice the large number of attacks with which he tried to tear off his head and heart without noticing for a few seconds. What a monster! Even with how much my power has increased, I've only managed to make him a few scratches that have healed faster than they've created. Even with how much my Kyokasu Jetsu has evolved to make illusions more real and immersive, it has been impossible to maintain it due to our great difference in power. Is the difference between us really insurmountable? Aizen began to believe that the same fate as that of the king of Quincy really awaited him. But he could not allow it. Once again Aizen put Broly into an illusion, distancing himself from the false figure of himself that he had left to distract Broly, while he attacked once more with everything he had. Flash! At that moment Aizen's head was shattered, as if it had been crushed by a train. But that train was Strauss, who had suddenly beheaded Aizen with a whiplash. And that Aizen's head was that of the true Aizen. Plop! Aizen's headless body fell to the ground, and after a few seconds his head completely regenerated thanks to the immortality he had acquired. K? How have you? It was the first thing that Aizen could express upon recovering his head, watching Broly with stupefaction. Impossible. I am absolutely sure that I used my total illusion on him, and the ability was still working. How could he know I was there? The answer is simple, the only reason you could hypnotize me before is because I let you do it. I can deny the effect of anything, that also includes your hypnotic ability. Apart from that I can also read your thoughts, which are not affected by your manipulation of the 5 senses, among others things because my abilities that don't depend on my 5 senses. In addition, my Strauss has copied the properties of your Kyokasu Jetsu so that I can always be in contact with your katana, and thus your ability will not affect me. I already told you that it is useless, you will not be able to win me, Broly said, teaching the 1000 plan man that nothing he planned would work against him. Impo. Aizen tried to scream with fear before the upper half of his body was destroyed in the same way that his head was previously destroyed. Plaf. Being hurt, feeling fear and facing someone stronger are conditions that help you evolve. You should thank me, I will do my best to make you reach your limit, Broly said, waiting for Aizen's body to regenerate before returning to repeat the gore process. Flash. Bomb. Boom. Flash. Flash. Crack. Flash. Flash. Clonk. Broly continued repeating that cycle of regeneration and destruction, creating earthquakes and destruction with each tail strike while Ichigo watched this bizarre situation from which despite his absurd senseless power-ups he could not get away from that situation very well. If they give me a choice, I prefer to face Yawatch, Ichigo thought as he tried to stay straight. Your power has increased a lot, quite impressive even for someone of my dimension, but this seems to be your limit. The Hogyoku is able to capture and materialize your desires, in your case evolve and make you more powerful, however it can only grant wishes that the user would be able to achieve by their means. More than fulfilling a wish, it is able to root and lead to person up to his desire quickly and conveniently. And it seems that you have already reached the limit of your true potential, Broly said as he examined Aizen as if he were a guinea pig, continuing with the beating to make sure his assumption wasn't wrong. Until... Kreok. The Society of Souls began to collapse as if it were a house of cards whose base has been hit. Oops, I may have hit too hard. Although not enough to destroy a dimension, Broly said alarmingly, as if he had stepped on a dog's tail and felt sorry for it. I fear that this is not the reason for the collapse of the Soul Society, and the other two worlds, said a voice that suddenly appeared behind Broly, Aizen, and Ichigo. Urahara. Aizen and Ichigo shouted, but each with a radically different attitude. That's right, it was Kisuke Urahara, the former captain of Division 12, one of the most enigmatic and intelligent characters in the manga and without a doubt the greatest scientific genius, so much so that he was the creator of the Hogyoku, the Bleach's most powerful and incredible item. With the disappearance of the Spirit King, which was the axis that sustained the balance between the worlds, the balance has been broken and this is the result. If not... Urahara tried to say before being interrupted. Yes. If we don't find a valid substitute for the Spirit King, everything will go to hell, and in addition that substitute must be Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy and Fullbring, just like the old Spirit King. Am I wrong? Broly said looking at Urahara to observe his reaction changes to confirm what he already knew. The fact that this mysterious being knew about this information surprised Urahara, which caused him to be startled by the fact that he knew a secret so well kept. No, you are not mistaken, whoever you are. Only someone with these characteristics is able to balance the three worlds and stop the collapse. Ichigo killed the Spirit King in a very awkward movement for his part, then Yawatch absorbed his body, gaining his powers and characteristics, so it would be a good substitute, but... I'm afraid I didn't leave anything from him, he said Broly continuing the conversation, lying a little about Yawatch's whereabouts. Aish, it is a pity to hear that. His body could have been used as a perfect substitute for the Spirit King, since by absorbing the previous Spirit King he had obtained the same characteristics, which is what really happened and was explained in the light novel, We Do Not Always Love You. This leaves us without many options, said Urahara, exposing his thoughts aloud and lamenting the bad luck they were having. Yes. But... where are we going to get someone with those unique characteristics? Someone who is Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy and Fullbring, Broly said with some sarcasm, as if he already knew the answer. At that time both Broly and Urahara, even Aizen and Rinji, looked in a rather comical way towards Ichigo, which until now doesn't seem to get the hint. Why do you look at me like that? Said Ichigo, who felt that everyone was undressing him with his eyes. Ichigo. You have worked very hard for the peace of the three worlds. Haven't you thought you deserve a promotion for it? Broly said trying to make Ichigo understand in a subtle way what everyone was suggesting. Are you saying that I have to become the new Spirit King to save the three worlds? Ichigo shouted as he pondered the necessary sacrifice that perhaps he should make to save everything he knows. It would be a good summary, but... as you should know, being Spirit King is not as glamorous as it seems. Think about it before making a decision, since once you do it there will be no turning back. You will not be able to leave the palace, let alone return to the human world, Urahara explained, observing Ichigo with some guilt. He wasn't satisfied with this desperate solution either. Ichigo frowned and clenched his fists tightly because of the difficult decision he was subjected to, however, in record time and decisively and emboldened, as if he were a shonen protagonist with a methamphetamine overdose he shouted, that doesn't matter now. If I don't do something there will be no human world to return to. Maybe. Plav. Broly teleported his hand near Ichigo and hit him with his finger on his forehead, sending him several meters behind, disorienting him and interrupting his motivation speech. Save your shitey motivational speech, it will not move anyone here. Sit here while the great Broly-sama resolves the situation once more. Mr. I killed the Spirit King. Now the elders must do something to solve the problems caused by the children. Don't look at me with that face, I just wanted to know if you were willing to sacrifice yourself or not, Broly said as he picked up Aizen with Strauss and said goodbye, teleporting near the ancient throne of the Spirit King. Broly and Aizen, which was loaded by Broly as if it were hand luggage, suddenly appeared in front of where the Spirit King once resided and which was now completely empty due to the desolation created by Yhwach and his army had caused. Well, here we am. Wasn't this the place you always tried to reach? How do you feel having achieved part of your goal? Alright? Wrong? Empty? Disappointed? Broly asked to the immobilized Aizen, trying to know what a person of the caliber of Aizen felt when he achieved his goal, even if it was achieved in bizarre like that. But Aizen didn't answer that question, although he would say, "Because of you, I don't feel any kind of satisfaction today, neither to recover my freedom, nor to defeat Yhwach, nor to evolve to my limit or to reach the Soul King Palace." But right now his top priority was knowing what Broly tried to do by bringing him here. "Damn you, what are you going to do with me now? Do you want to use me in some way to replace the Soul King but becoming only something inferior to a lifeless object that only serves to stop the world collapse? Do you want to make fun of my dream until the end?" Aizen asked Broly, very indignant and fearing the worst possible situation in those circumstances, since that is what really happened with Yhwach. "Ha ha ha ha. You have a good imagination, Aizen-chan, but no. I have better plans for you, but for now you will only be a spectator of my colossal power," Broly said as he lifted Aizen still tied by Strauss, to make sure he could watch the show. Broly extended her hand to the front and... "Impossible. This is something absurd," Aizen shouted, who had just had one of the most shocking shocks of his life. Aizen couldn't believe his eyes. The Soul King appeared before him as if he had never been hurt or absorbed in the first place. It seemed impossible, but there was no doubt. Broly had been able to resurrect the Soul King, rebuild the Soul King Palace to normal and stop the destruction of the worlds, all that in a single second, in a single movement and without the need for a sacrifice. Even now Broly was fixing his hair with the reflection of the barrier surrounding the Spirit King, as if it were just one more mirror, using telekinesis to move it around the room while he was changing his clothes. "How? What are you?" Aizen asked on the verge of madness upon witnessing this feat. "I know what you're thinking. All your life trying to reach the supreme power of this world, and yet after getting it you are still an ant compared with me. Years and years trying to reach the Soul King Palace, making countless sacrifices and machinations, all this so that I could teleport you easily as if you were a carry-on luggage without the ability to do anything. Your greatest ambition was to supplant the supreme entity of all your worlds, the Soul King, and now you have just seen how I have resurrected and manipulated it as if it were nothing more than a helpless animal, like you. It must be frustrating, right? You finally understand what it is to be a small baby fish in an ocean of sharks, despite believing that you were the king of sharks," Broly said, observing Aizen that he was slowly disappearing, being devoured by the formless realm. "Why? Why? Why are you torturing me in this way?" Aizen shouted, unleashing all his fury and despair, a fury and despair 1,000 times greater than those he experienced the day he was sealed by Urahara. "To show you the harsh reality, and give you the opportunity to broaden your horizons," Broly replied solemnly seconds before Aizen's voice disappeared forever from that dimension. After Broly proved to be as informed as Urahara, tear down Ichigo with one finger and teleport with Aizen to an unknown place. Ichigo had informed Urahara about Broly's absurd powers, what had happened, his bizarre and mysterious personality, and the motivations that Broly himself announced. Form a super evil team. With that in mind, Urahara began organizing all the information in his head and tried to formulate a plan to save the day. Not only to stop the destruction of the worlds, but also to stop Broly in case they managed to survive, but he planned to do something perverse later, but... Brahm! While he was thinking of different options, the collapse of the Soul Society stopped and the Soul King Palace that was modified by Yhwach returned to its original state, changing from the giant Quincy Zaichin to the large set of platforms and buildings distributed on several levels. "Re? That has been fast," said Urahara, who quickly understood what happened by a simple relationship between the events who was responsible for these changes. "That guy has solved everything?" Ichigo said, relieved but perplexed to see that the apocalyptic situation had been resolved in such a short time. "That's right, it has taken me only a few seconds since most of the time I was chatting with the former captain. And my name is not that guy, my name is Broly," said Broly, teleporting in front of Ichigo and hitting him again with his finger on the forehead, throwing him several meters away. It seems that Broly didn't like Ichigo too much. "Ah!" Ichigo shouted as he flew towards the floor. "Palm. In this manga there isn't much idiotic teenager to rehabilitate, but in your case, there is a bad protagonist. Therefore, Fuck you Gary Stu with the personality and goals of a bland shrimp that thrives for the life without a rational explanation with one power-up after another power-up that come out of nowhere. You are shit. The worst shonen protagonist I have seen. Urahara started led by the unexpected comic attack without too much bad intent on Ichigo, once again, pretended that nothing happened with the knocked out Ichigo and asked Broly in a friendly way about what had happened. Well Broly, it seems you could solve this little problem for us. We still don't know who you are, exactly where you come from or what you have done to stop the end of the worlds, but if something is sure is that we owe you a lot. I don't know how you would like to be rewarded, said Urahara with the intention of knowing the reasons for this sudden help from Broly. Oh, don't worry, I haven't saved all the worlds with the idea of getting a reward from you or anyone else. In fact, if I wanted something I would take it. As for the restoration of your world, it has been nothing, just a small detail to show my courtesy as a good tourist. I have resurrected the old Soul King and put it in his rightful place, although I haven't done the same with the Royal Guard. I am curious to see the resurrection process of Ichibe Hyasube. It is a very unique resurrection process, stealing a bit of power from someone that says his name is something quite unique. Although it is a disappointment, I thought he would talk to me mentally right now and ask me to keep saying his name. I guess he doesn't trust me too much, or maybe he needs the power of someone from this universe, a power compatible with him I guess. Ichibe. A quite exceptional and unique being. I would love to have him in my ranks, Broly said, licking his lips as if he were thinking of one of his favorite dishes, a dish that he didn't expect to find in the menu but that he wanted very much. That disturbing reaction from Broly made the until now friendly Urahara frown and raise his guard even more towards him. Yes, Ichigo had told me about your recruitment plan. Since I don't see Aizen by your side, I must assume that he has already joined your group, although it is hard for me to believe that he did it on his own will. Certainly, at first he didn't like the idea, in the end either. But now he is very glad that I have convinced him. Broly replied quite sinisterly. I see. And by chance do you think of convincing Ichibe in the same way as Aizen? Said Urahara, bringing his hand towards his Zanpakuto Beneheim, fearing that it would be necessary to confront Broly, although he knew that the odds were against him. Broly put his hand to his chin as if he were thinking deeply about what Urahara had asked. Well, it would be something quite beneficial for me, but the truth is that you interest me more, Broly said in a very disturbing way, appearing behind Urahara, putting his hands on his head, massaging her in a very creepy way. So spooky, disturbing, frightening and sudden were Broly's words and actions that Urahara's blood froze. He was completely paralyzed by the fear. As if he were a little girl who has been grabbed by a strange, powerful and dangerous man from behind, knowing how dark his destiny would be and that he couldn't do anything to avoid it. Ichibe is more powerful and has very mysterious powers. You also have them, especially for your Bankai, but you are the greatest scientific genius of this universe, and many others. No matter the problem that arises, you are able to find a solution using this little head, creating incredible inventions one after another, like the Hogyoku. You really are unique, special, and exceptional in every way. I get excited to think what you would be able to achieve under my directions, Broly said, drooling while he was still stroking the head of the terrified Urahara, who felt like a guinea pig with whom an investigator played before using it for an uncertain and cruel experiment. This is my end, Urahara thought, swallowing hard, expecting the worst possible development at the hands of an abominable being from whom he had no chance to defeat or escape. It was then when Broly suddenly released Urahara and led the conversation in a more casual way. It is what I would like to say, however, you don't meet the recruitment requirements. You are exceptional, without a doubt, but you are not a villain, you haven't died, nor will you die shortly, a great shame. Although also, there is another reason why I will not take you with me, Broly said, reassuring Urahara. When he was suddenly interrupted. Damn, you're going to pay for this. Ichigo yelled, extremely angry and indignant for Broly's mistreatment and contempt, so angry that he forgot how strong Broly was, flying towards him with all his might. If that is what you want, you better have a new absurd power-up to offer. Are you from any other race that we haven't heard about until now? Broly said, sarcastically, giving him another swipe on the forehead, with the same result as before. Palm. Ah, Kurosaki-kun. Orihime shouted in alarm, which was accompanied by many others, such as Sado, Rukia, Shunsui, Ishida and many more, that as intelligent people they had waited for the danger to end to appear. And while Orihime quickly healed Ichigo, the others stood guard around him while the orange head regained his conscience. Broly gave them with his last words, too many people for my liking, anyway. Remember my words, Kurosaki Ichigo. Before the doubt, the most buxom. It will useful for you in the future. Ciao. Stereotyped idiots. And with that unexpected concept in mind, he left. What the hell? Ichigo shouted, not knowing what was happening, because it was happening and what he had done to deserve that contempt, physical violence, and strange phrases. Desire Realm. Broly spacecraft. One of the many Brolys in charge of the recruitment process sat on a throne with a soda in his hand, enjoying the work well done of one of his bodies and holding a team meeting in a very long and luxurious table. So in the end you are not going to make Urahara, Ichibe and Yamamoto join our team, Broly-sama? Asked the definitively Aizen, that after a little training, he had become one of Broly's most loyal lackeys. I can understand your proposition, Aizen, especially with Urahara, is someone capable of working many miracles, but Ichibe and Yamamoto. I will not deny that they are powerful and with many resources and knowledge, however they were defeated by me long before I acquired my ultimate power. I don't see them very necessary at this point, Yawatch replied, expressing his opinion at the same time he announced his achievements. The discussion between Aizen and Yawatch was going to continue until I'm afraid they don't meet the requirements I'm looking for. It is not that they are little sisters of charity, nor do I underestimate their abilities and possibilities for improvement, but I fear that there is something that they lack, something that you have always left over. Ambition. Ambition to transcend, seize power, make that nothing or anyone rule over your life, whether it be a moral system, a political system, an economic system, the biology itself, physical laws, desires, history, yourself. Or even God. Except for me, Broly said solemnly and charismatically, making both Aizen and Yawatch feel flattered and identified with those words. Ichibe, Yamamoto, and especially Urara. All of them are and were powerful, intelligent, gifted and insightful, as much as to understand their position in the universe, to question the rules of the universe and even the position they occupy in it, as much as you too, and with the necessary means to rise above them. However, while you rebelled against that established order to rise and replace those constructions, they became attached to them, and even put themselves at their service, fearing change and the consequences they will bring, and that will be necessary to achieve it. I'm afraid I don't need people like that on my team. Since what I'm trying to do is way above it. Although I think some will occasionally accept my orders with the correct remuneration, so there is not so much trouble, Broly said, exposing his Nichen speech while the soda was finished, and Aizen and Yawatch nodded, agreeing with everything he was saying. By the way, Broly-sama, have you got used to your new eyes? Yawatch asked to his new boss. Broly turned to him and activated his new powers obtained today and said, pretty good. It still seems strange to see so many things at once, especially things that are about to happen. However, the results are amazing and wonderful, all of them, Broly replied, to which many pupils sprouted on his three eyes. That was the signal that he had acquired the Almighty of Yawatch, as well as all the other unique powers and experiences that Quincy had, even the other skills that Yawatch handed over to his soldiers and that they returned to him. I'm glad my powers have satisfied you, Broly-sama, Yawatch said, being satisfied by his boss's words, demonstrating that Broly's loyalty method was very efficient. By the way, Aizen, sorry for the trouble of taking off your Hogyoku, but it's something I more or less need to make sure everything goes as planned, Broly said, pretending to feel guilty. Broly had extracted the Hogyoku from Aizen and merged it with the formless realm. With this he made his properties extend by his particular dimension, where his soul and origins resided, that caused a similar effect to what Aizen had experienced since it was implanted in his body. An infinite evolution and have the convenience in your favor to achieve what you want, as long as it is within the user's capabilities. Ah, another reality warping in my dimension that allows me to get what I want. This takes away the excitement of my ascension and makes the hard work and sacrifice remain in the background. With this the fun of leveling up on my own will be reduced, as if I was cheating in a video game, but I am a practical and intelligent guy, or at least I try. It would be illogical not to use something so convenient for my purposes. You cannot have it all on you, life. Don't worry, thanks your great help, I was able to reach the limit that the Hogyoku could grant me. It was no longer useful for my purposes since I reached that point. However, apart from the Hogyoku, what do you think about the skills I have provided, Broly-sama? Aizen said, trying to compete for the Employee of the Month title with Yawatch. Nothing bad. You are undoubtedly a genius among geniuses, you have managed to master all Shinigami disciplines perfectly, even you are a brilliant scientist, especially Kido is something quite interesting and with many possibilities to offer, but as for the Zanpakuto, Broly said, somewhat disappointed with the katana that had appeared in his hand. It was the Zanpakuto that he had created with the knowledge acquired in the world of Bleach, a fairly large Zanpakuto, like the one Ichigo had the first time he acquired Shinigami powers. Is something wrong with your Zanpakuto, sir? Aizen asked, understanding that something didn't satisfy his boss. Well, I'll give you a graphic demonstration, Broly said as he got up and put himself in the optimal position to brand his sword. Then he gave a vertical cut with all his strength to the air and slash! Crack! The Zanpakuto was destroyed in 1,000 pieces by the same force that Broly applied by wielding a single blow. As you can see, the Zanpakutos are too weak for my unlimited strength, and I think that due to certain incompatibilities of my soul, either by belonging to another universe or by having my soul merged with my own dimension, by having a very cool stand, which is the representation of my soul, or because I'm so powerful that I don't need a weapon. Maybe that's why I'm not able to know my Zanpakuto's name. Too bad. Broly said, explaining the reason of his dissatisfaction. I'm sorry, Broly-sama, Aizen said, apologizing for not being able to offer him as many benefits as Yawatch. It doesn't matter. I didn't have high expectations in my Zanpakuto from the beginning. There was a possibility that something like this could happen. Apart from that, I don't see with good eyes to use objects or equipment to fight seriously. It is one of the reasons why I discarded Saint Seiya as a world. Armors and weapons are not something I want. For now I will focus on collecting skills, powerful and practical skills. The more and more incomprehensible and strange the better, said Broly, returning the Zanpakuto where it used to be. Come on, lift that mood, guys. Some of your freedoms may have been restricted, either by myself or by yourself. But still you are gods who try to reach a higher end, superior than any of you could even imagine. One day Medaka Kurakami, the former president of the student council and the busty and almost perfect protagonist of this manga, Zenkichi Hitoyoshi, the former friend-zoned and childhood friend of Medaka's, a normal boy without excessively special qualities, compared with the monster around him, the current student council president and a very good boy. Misogi Kamagawa, former vice president of the student council, mentally unbalanced, weak but powerful, immortal, shonen jump fanatic, weird as fuck, and so far the best antagonist and possibly best character in the manga. Najimi Ajumu, an enigmatic exchange student, founder of Hakanawa Academy, the creator of the Flask Plan, leader of the Not Equals and former antagonist. A young student older than the universe itself and with 12,858,051,967,633,865 skills at her disposal, and with the ability to create even more skills. Everyone noticed that Hanzo Shiranui, the adorable and enigmatic eating loli, has disappeared from both the school and everyone's memories, because she asked Kamagawa to use his all fiction for that, turning all the memories of her in fiction, except for his own, since for various reasons it wasn't possible to erase them. After some revelations from Ajumu, it is revealed that Shiranui was the double of Medaka, who had gone to the academy and approached Medaka only and exclusively to fulfill that work, the work of complementing Medaka in a magical way, mainly eating everything she didn't eat, and as that work was already over, so she left the academy and almost everyone memories, since in principle everything was a farce. After certain episodes and very crazy events, the four most relevant characters in the manga until now arrive at the Shiranui village, the home of Shiranui, where she was preparing for her new job as double. When they finally got to meet Shiranui, she changed a lot. There was no sign of her cheerful, energetic, playful and eager attitude. Now she was serious, respectful, direct, and didn't eat too much. Medaka and Zenkichi asked her to return to the academy with them, her friends, who loved her so much and cared for her. However, Shiranui replied that she never considered them her friends and that everything she had done in the previous 162 chapters had been to fulfill her work as a double, nothing more, and as her work had ended due to the mental change of Medaka, there was no longer any reason to stay by their side, since she also hated life in the academy. Every action she took, every help she gave them, every time she used them, every laugh or emotion she showed, was only part of her job. They were never her own or real emotions of thoughts. If those are your true emotions, then I will withdraw. If this is the case, I would leave immediately like my old days when I was quick to understand. But if your true emotions are something different from what you're saying, then we will do our best to work towards that. Because we are the comrades you've created at Hakanawa Academy, Medaka said, showing the determination of their friendship as if this were a shonen manga. Ah, ahi. Hya. Yuisham, that's how I usually laughed, right? Don't make me laugh now. So hilarious. You really think I have any true emotions? I just have a clear-cut attitude. That's something you should have known completely. Besides, don't most people hate school? I just a place people reluctantly attend because they have to. Even though you complain that it's troublesome or exhausting, a shul is a shul because you have to attend, Hanzode Shiranui said in a mocking way. Shiranui. Zenkichi sighed. Yes, that's right. I hated Hokanawa Academy. I never felt excited walking the path to school. My heart never throbbed in excitement over the start of the day whenever I walked through TH Shul gate. I was never HPPY even though I was invited to play in class. The shul lunch was so disgusting, even more so since I overate. It wasn't fun at all being surrounded by students with one or two unique habits. I was never excited that every day wasn't like the last. I was never healed by the academy's flower-filled scenery. I never felt challenged or satisfied thinking of tricks or plans to break down desperate situations. I never felt cheerful attending the academy's sported or cultural festival after frolicking so much. When I was with everyone, I never once forgot that I was only here to do a job. Everything from the warmth of people. A hard hurl. Everything and everyone. I hated it. I hated every bit of it. Everything about Hakanawa Academy. Shiranui said, crying and blushing for not being honest with her feelings, not even with herself. So please Kamagawa, senpai. Please make it so, my memories never happened, with you minus all fiction. If you did that, then it wouldn't matter whether you are involved or not, right? If I forget about Hakanawa Academy, then the princess will surely give up. Said Shiranui, totally desperate. She couldn't stand all these emotions. Although it was for a short time, we did study in the same class. I want to say okay, but that is impossible, Shiranui-chan, Kamagawa said with a totally blank face. Why is that? Are you saying I have to be in hand-bra jeans? Shiranui replied, remembering the perverted tastes of Kamagawa, and his perverted requests as well. My current trend is an open-front hooded sweatshirt, but that's besides the point, Shiranui-chan. It's true, as of now my all fiction has pretty much deteriorated. According to Nasa, I can't make it so things that have strong feelings attached to them never happened. Therefore, the fact that Zenkichi-chan still remembers you is proof that your feelings are still at Hokanawa Academy, Kamagawa said while Shiranui was shocked and continued crying upon learning the truth. Even though he is how he is, Zenkichi-chan is still the student council president after all. Whether good or bad, he is the representative of Hakanawa Academy, that's why your feelings stayed there. Therefore it's impossible to make it so that your memories of Hakanawa Academy never happened. Because your feelings are so strong. It's something a minus like me can't control, Kamagawa said with joy, disappointment and melancholy. Shiranui, I don't care what you think of me. If your job is more important than school, then that's fine. I was seriously on the verge of crying, but that's fine. But you Don Zero T have to make the farewell like this. WHE should at least have a farewell party for you. Just once. Or twice if we can. I want us to eat meals together and talk about nonchalant things for once. I want to play an eraser dropping game with you. So at least stay put until the third semester of the academy ends. I'm sure Madaka-chan will be able to do something about everyone else's memories of you. Zenkichi said in a very exaggerated and melodramatic way, as if this were a shonen manga. Shiranui before this display of emotions dried her tears with joy and sadness. I can't do that, Hitoyoshi. I'm not allowed to leave the village unless it's for a job. Because in the Shiranui village there is something that can never be leaked out. Darkness. In an instant a huge and terrifying figure destroyed the wall of that room, using Obi as a weapon to do that. Obi, the small leader of the Shiranui village, a person so difficult to catch that even Madaka was unable to touch her in a surprise attack, and yet she had been caught and was being held and used as a weapon by other person. And that person hit Shiranui mercilessly with Obi, slamming her against the wall without anyone being able to do anything, not even react. Madaka was surprised and even scared by this turn of events, by the presence of who looked like a terrifying enemy. She was scared just like Najimi, but it seemed she more scared than her, scared for another reason. While Madaka was restless due to the ignorance, she was quite the opposite. She knew perfectly who was the monster that appeared in front of them. What is this guy? Is he a villager? But he twisted that Obi person around and blew Shiranui awa. Zenikichi exclaimed, who wasn't able to understand what was happening. Good, just like that, entertain the guest. Try not to be rude, thought. Shishim. Ihiko, said a wounded and bloody Obi, which was still held as if she were an item in the hands of a kind of human-shaped monster. A huge and muscular man with ogre horns, wild hair and hands as black and menacing as his own horns, as if they weren't made of flesh and blood. At that moment, the almighty Najimi Ajumu, who hadn't intervened until now, said with great concern and cold sweat on his forehead, as if they were about to face the greatest and terrible crisis of their lives, "Hey! Madaka-chan, Kamagawa-kun, and Hitoyoshi-kun. I can hold him off for 15 seconds. Run. Gejejejejejej. Fresh. Ihiko shouted with a terrifying psycho smile, "It's been 5,000 years, Equalist, this reunion is certainly fresh. If I were to address you by modern times, it would be Ajumu Najimi, right?" said, or shouted Ihiko, pointing defiantly to Najimi. Madaka, upon hearing that conversation, asked Najimi what was happening. 5,000 years? Anshinin-san, do you know this man? But at that moment Zenkichi was about to attack that inhuman monster for what he had done to her friend, a monster that even Najimi was afraid of. "Wei Zenkichi!" Madaka shouted when she saw that her future husband, for a long time and still not quite clear at this point in history, was about to commit great recklessness. But Zenikichi, who was about to attack Ihiko with a flying kick, was suspended in the air without being able to move a millimeter, but not only Zenikichi, neither Madaka nor Kamagawa were able to move or a muscle. Everyone was surprised, including Najimi and Ihiko. That meant that none in that room was responsible for that paralyzing ability. But before they could ask or find the culprit, in that precise moment someone appeared out of nowhere between both sides. A being with the appearance of a half-humanate man in his 20s, he was extremely tall and muscular, more even than the huge Ihiko. His long hair and fur that covered his whole body was reddish in color with a monkey's tail same color, and on his forehead there was a third eye. Two Shiranuis. What's happening? Zenikichi thought with great confusion, because of how close he was to her, he could perfectly verify that she was his friend. From his appearance it was evident that this being wasn't human, like Najimi. And if the situation weren't already strange, he also had on his shoulder an unharmed and sleepy Shiranui, although there was another one on the floor, which was hit by Ihiko. Here is another interesting turn of events. Just when a mysterious and powerful man appeared out of nowhere bringing chaos and despair, another even more mysterious and powerful man appeared out of nowhere. This is something that doesn't happen in many mangas. In fact, I don't remember any chapter like this. What will he do? Will he solve the situation? Will he bring more chaos? Will he be an ally? Or a new enemy? Why do he have that loli on his shoulder if her body is supposedly stamped against the wall? What do he do to keep a fur and hair so clean, smooth and shiny? We will see all this in the next episode of Madaka Box, in participation with Dragon Ball, said Broly, taking action in this world for first time, breaking the fourth wall in an excessively obvious way. Here is another interesting turn of events. Just when a mysterious and powerful man appeared out of nowhere bringing chaos and despair, another even more mysterious and powerful man appeared out of nowhere. This is something that doesn't happen in many mangas. In fact, I don't remember any chapter like this. What will he do? Will he solve the situation? Will he bring more chaos? Will he be an ally? Or a new enemy? Why do he have that loli on his shoulder if her body is supposedly stamped against the wall? What do he do to keep a fur and hair so clean, smooth and shiny? We will see all this in the next episode of Madaka Box, in participation with Dragon Ball, said Broly, taking action in this world for first time, breaking the fourth wall in an excessively obvious way. Choked eyes. X6. What the hell? Shouted the extremely confused Zenkichi, still suspended in the air without being able to move. What kind of skill is it? Who are these two monsters? What the hell is happening with Shiranui? This Najimi, this strange being is also an acquaintance of yours? Madaka asked to Najimi, who was still trying to assimilate this disconcerting situation, pointing at Broly and looking at Najimi waiting for an answer. I'm afraid I don't know this one at all, Madaka, but something tells me that he knows everything about us. Najimi said with cold sweat all over her beautiful body while she watched with one eye the Jugon of Broly, who seemed to be looking through her clothes, skin, and soul without leaving a place without hiding, and with the other one to Ihiko, her greatest enemy and threat in this world. Interesting, and fresh. Ihiko shouted, observing Shiranui's body that he had already hit and the Shiranui that was on Broly's shoulder. Broly, a being he was trying to understand, and upon doing that he felt a fresh sensation in his body, a feeling that he had never felt before. This is Kamagawa said, showing an exaggerated expressiveness on his usually plain face, something that almost never happened, a chaotic and disconcerting expression in which surprise, emotion, disbelief and fear came together as he stared without blinking at Broly, remembering what he recently said, and with those words in mind he used each neuron in his brain to order and clarify his thoughts and conclusions. This should be impossible, right? Kamagawa wondered to himself. It was as if he had seen him before, but it seemed impossible that can be true. What happened? Are you so shocked to see that a mysterious, attractive, eccentric and strong-looking character appears out of nowhere and that without any previous introduction in history steals the screen? I don't understand why you are surprised. It is what always happens in this manga. You should be used to it. You have almost 163 chapters of Medaka Box with this kind of narrative resource. Oops, I'm sorry, you were still suspended in the air, said Broly, apologizing to Zenkichi, who was being a victim of his spatial freezing, which can freeze something in space. Manga. Chapters. Medaka Box. Kamagawa and Najimi repeated in unison with alarmism, dismayed eyes, and cold sweat all over their bodies, while the other did not pay attention to those words as if it only were an eccentricity, one more of the many crazy eccentrics that had been found so far until now. Plof. When he cancelled the spatial freezing, Zenkichi fell to the ground and the first thing he thought was, Shiranui. What happened to you a few seconds ago? Why are you on that giant's shoulder? But first of all, are you alright? Zenkichi asked hurriedly due to the concern for his friend. I don't know what happened. I was talking so quietly with you and before I knew I was hooked on the shoulder of this mastodon as if I were a koala. And I can't disengage from him. Shiranui said, very confused as she tried to detach herself from Broly's muscular and hairy shoulder. Allow me to clear your doubt, said Broly, transporting the wounded body of the other Shiranui that was near the wall to his hand with telekinesis. You will see, from the beginning I knew that Shiranui was going to be attacked. So before coming here with the courtesy of Urahara-chan, he created an exact Jigai of Shiranui, and at the time he was going to be beaten I exchanged the real one for the fake one with an improved version of the Kawarimi no Jutsu that I learned in Konoha. Honestly, I don't know why they stopped using that jutsu in Naruto in the last parts. It's extremely useful and easy, Broly said, thinking about the inconsistencies that Naruto's story presented while Kamagawa's facial expression distorted even more. This, and why have you hooked her on your shoulder? Medaka asked, who diverted her attention from the details Broly said to focus on what she cared about. Then Broly with a slight mischievous smile replied, well, after reading and traveling to different manga/anime dimensions I realized that. But I don't care about that details, but due to that previous explanation and the fact that I didn't realize everything you've done under my nose has made realize that unlike Najimi's toys you are fresh. Ihiko shouted, pouncing at Broly, brandishing his Obi-san weapon with the clear intention of killing him. Until now he had kept a low profile because he was trying to study Broly, one of the few beings that he found so far that could be called human from his point of view, and not insects. Therefore, once he understood what Broly had done and how to prevent him from hitting whoever he wanted to hit, thought that there was no need to continue that meaningless conversation. First he had to kill or seriously hurt Broly and then solve the problem with Medaka and the others, and of course have a fresh reunion with an old acquaintance. But plom. Broly moved half of his tail stand to stop Ihiko's blunt human weapon attack, as if he had hit a very strong mattress, barely creating an appreciable impact. Ihiko and Najimi exclaimed, highly baffled by that surreal defensive maneuver. But what surprised them most was the next, since a strange sphere of energy appeared at the tip of the tail, pointing at Ihiko. Pium. And from that energy ball emerged a large and powerful energy beam which created a great road of destruction in which Ihiko flew away, moving away from the main stage to the limits of the village. They all overreacted upon seeing that absurd attack taken from a 90th anime. What? Najimi shouted as if she had witnessed the most unusual, frightening and hopeful scene he had ever witnessed in her life. This weirdo just parried and knocked him as if he were a fly. Do not interrupt me while I speak, Mr. Illogically powerful last-minute final boss that the authors invented to finish a story whose scale of power and madness got out of their hands, although there is no argumentative justification for your existence or importance, Broly shouted at the hole in the wall with indignation. Monster. Najimi whispered to herself, simply expressing what was going through her mind. Najimi, despite her more than 12,858,051,967,633,865 abilities, of which many of them makes her an almost omnipotent being, lost overwhelmingly more than 100 million times against him, only being able to escape and try to avoid for years. As I said, After reading and traveling to different manga/anime dimensions, I realized that many badass men like me carry a loli with them, such as Kenpachi, post-Golden Age Guts, Accelerator, Adam Blade, Araragi, Saishamaru, the elite among the elite, and wanted to see what it felt like. Spoiler, not bad as a decoration or comic element, but the FBI will not think the same, said Broly, removing the epicity of the moment with that comment that was out of place. WTF? They all asked, except a certain person. It was being very difficult for them to understand this strange subject. For everyone except Kamagawa, I agree with your exquisite taste, although I personally prefer girls with open chest hoodies. However, that attack, that appearance, that tail, is not exactly the same as I know, but... Are you really? Kamagawa said, being about to show how far his deductions had gone, revealing something incredibly crazy and shocking in equal parts. However, Broly answered the future question of Kamagawa thanks to his new ability to see the near future that Yawatch gave him. Exactly, my dear, screwed up of the head, but more or less reformed friend, that casually you are a great reader of the weekly Shonen Jump of this world, which is the same as the one that was written in mine, except for the manga of Medaka. I am a Scion, but not just any Scion. I am the fucking legendary Super Scion, but not only that, I am also the Super Scion God, and that is not the end of that, I'm also a true Scion, and in case it is still not shocking for you, I am a fuck omniversal conqueror. Broly the Magnificent. Nice to meet you, Broly said, creating a great presentation with special effects that would make Tony Stark's events seem like a school theater in comparison. Broly? Kamagawa shouted, believing he was about to faint from shock and emotion, even though he wasn't sure if that was his identity. His appearance wasn't exactly the same as in the movies of the 90s, especially by the third eye, that reminded him more of Tenshinhan or Hai from Yu Yu Hakusho. Broly? Wasn't that wicked ultra-muscled green-haired psycho from Dragon Ball Z movies? Except for the muscles and the absurd strength, they don't look alike at all, Zenkichi asked, because since he is teenager Japanese man he had a certain popular culture of his country, but he didn't buy that explanation yet. There were too many differences, and everybody would find that impossible, that was too absurd. Please do something, I can't get off his shoulder, Shiranui said, pleading, as if this conversation did not matter, her priorities were other. Okay. This is an absurdly strong madman who is believed to be a character of the Weekly Shonen Jump. An absurdly strong madman who thinks he is a character of the Weekly Shonen Jump and has abilities to resemble a Dragon Ball character, or that he can replicate similar powers. Or... Medaka said, trying to find a logical explanation, well, more or less logical for everything around Broly. In her opinion, was totally impossible for someone from Dragon Ball, a manga character, to be in the real world talking to them. These must be delusions of that man who, either because he's crazy or wanted to confuse them, was telling them this bizarre history. But someone did not agree with that opinion. I'm afraid you're not right, Medaka. I feel that everything he says is true. He is really a character that belongs to the Dragon Ball universe, said Najimi, who thanks to one of her abilities was able to corroborate that Broly was telling the truth, which made Broly by far the most dangerous and extraordinary being that existed right now, someone who could not judge by logic, like Ihiko. I knew it, it seems that I won for the first time. Where is my prize? Kamagawa said cheerfully, but with his usual squid face without expression. No one was competing, so you still don't win. Please, get me out of here. Shiranui replied, who had been repeating the same thing for a while now. But Medaka was not distracted for a second by the intervention of Kamagawa and Shiranui. She was convinced that there should be another explanation. Najimi cannot be really serious. There must be some other explanation, maybe someone has materialized it in some way with a strange ability that... But... Plas. 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 Broly clapped. Bravo. Bravo. Good intuition, Najimi. I could not expect less from the leader of the Not Equal and from someone who has broken the fourth wall on so many occasions. And indeed, as you have mentioned a few times, you and all of you are characters from a manga called Medaka Box, written by Nizio Eisen and illustrated by Akira Akatsuki and published in Weekly Shonen Jump, where obviously Medaka is the protagonist. And I, as a good neighbor of Weekly Shonen Jump magazine, have come to visit you, even though my character has never officially appeared in a magazine story. Broly replied by taking out several volumes of Medaka Box from the Formless Realm, opening them in the chapter they were currently. Once again the audience was startled to a great extent, and even began to have existential doubts, despite the fact that Najimi had been announcing practically the same throughout the serialization in his presence, although in a more subtle way. Oh, and why are you here? Have Toriyama and other executives decided to make a special crossover chapter to sell more? Najimi replied, quite disturbed by the words and presence of Broly. Hajajajajajajajajajajajaj. No. I'm afraid the truth is much more confusing and interesting. I came here alone, of my own accord, as I had been planning for years before even being reborn. In fact, I am not even the Broly that some of you know, mainly because this is the Broly canon redesigned for the 2018 movie and this manga ended in 2013. But above all because my true self comes from the world where True Shonen Jump is really published. And I have an offer for you that you surely won't be able to refuse, Broly explained in a badass way as he complemented his explanation with a flat-screen television, showing images of everything he narrated. Offer? What kind of offer? Najimi asked, since she didn't lost nothing to ask, especially after hearing everything she heard. But suddenly... Boom! Fresh hay. That was a fresh hay attack. You are the first person who has managed to hurt me in this way since thousands of years ago. I congratulate you. Fresh. Ihiko shouted, destroying the wall to enter the room, although few centimeters to his side there was already the hole through which he flew out, and near the other hole through which he entered the first time. Ihiko had reappeared abruptly and violently as in the previous occasion. The only differences were that on this occasion he hadn't come attacking anyone with someone, and that he had a large mark and traces of blood on his chest, caused by the energy attack Broly launched in the previous chapter. This is above my expectations, Najimi thought with a really overwhelming expression that had great meaning in the face of a being as powerful as Najimi. How could she not be shocked? Broly had been able to hurt Ihiko with a seemingly casual attack. Najimi just thought he had been knocked out, but not hurt. Ihiko was the holder of several very illogically powerful skills, and among them he had two that granted him with the most impressive defense of Medaka Box manga. Subjective immunity and irreversible destruction. Subjective immunity, something that Ihiko doesn't recognize, doesn't affect him. Either abnormalities or minuses that he don't recognize at all, ignore defensive abilities that he doesn't recognize, or even attacks, and making Ihiko recognize attacks is incredibly difficult. If he receives a blow that is not powerful enough in his opinion to perceive it as an attack, he will believe that it has been a caress, and will affect him as a caress. In case he is pierced by thousands of swords that he doesn't recognize as powerful ones, he will perceive that they have done a nice acupuncture session. Even if an attack is powerful enough to damage him, it doesn't mean it will affect him. However, an enemy may be better off if he didn't recognize their techniques to begin with, as the alternative can be far worse due to his other skill, irreversible destruction. Irreversible destruction, any damage Ihiko deals to the world doesn't heal, that includes even unconventional ways of healing such as Kamagawa's all fiction. However, the true horror of this ability manifests itself in the defensive application. The stronger an attack used against him, the further the attack itself will be broken, and never return to normal. An arm used to punch him will be permanently broken, and superpowers will often become unusable. He will also no longer recognize any ability or technique previously used against him as an attack, so even if the power is somehow still functional after being used on him, it will not affect him anyway. He has been able to recognize Ihiko's attack, hurt him, and Edima's he hasn't received the impact of his own attack. How could she not be surprised by that? She had never managed to do even one of those things despite having cheat skills like Life 0, nullify whichever skill or ability she desires. Beginner's hard luck, makes defense impossible. Reverse cover, can cancel the damage dealt to her. Add balloon attack, opponent can't counter-attack. My inflation, the stronger the enemy is, the stronger the user is skill. Condition Bon, set the rules of the fight. Humor contrast, she is always stronger than her opponents. Lost password, turn the enemy back to level 1. Present for you, bestow weak points to her opponents. Death's moment, if she is seen, they die. Murder mathematic, win against stronger people's skill. God Eye, plot manipulation. Transport plan, manipulate fate. Everything lost, controls hearts. Exception please, creates an exception. All or them impossible skills that logically should be able to battle Ihiko and even defeat him, and with all of them together defeat him without too much difficulty. However, Najimi was unable to do so. That's why when she saw that Broly casually and without consequences hurt Ihiko, she could only think of a definition for him. Surreal monster. But Broly didn't care about those little details, as well as the long conversations between the three members of the student council, or of the lowly that begged to let her down. Those conversations were unnecessary for him at that moment, and they were being too long. He remained focused on his personnel selection strategy between the two, or maybe three, most broken beings in this manga. Oh perfect, the big guy has arrived, that will prevent me from explaining things twice, Broly said with satisfaction, as if he were killing two birds with one stone. Explain. Ihiko replied, who hadn't heard or understood the whole conversation that had taken place so far. Yes, you will see. As I had suggested and explained before, I knocked you out of this room very easily. I am Broly from the canon universe of Dragon Ball, the only being in history that has been for his own means really able to escape from the lesser realities and reach the origin reality from all the realities are created, a reality far above the true Earth where the true weekly Shonen Jump is written. From a while ago I managed to infiltrate that reality, and since then I have been traveling to various worlds of the magazine, to get new forms of power, skills, knowledge, and recruit new colleagues with extraordinary skills to join me. And you are lucky ones who have been selected to join my ranks, Broly said, explaining on of his great goals for this volume, hoping to thrill his small mostly teenage group. Recruit? Ihiko asked boldly to give more emphasis to that detail and show his rejection about Broly's plan. Yes, it's a great offer, you should reconsider it, Broly insisted, not accepting a no for answer. Reconsider it? Does that mean then that this is a peaceful and pressure-free negotiation? Asked Kamagawa, who as an old villain understood the way of talk that Broly was using. Everyone was waiting for Broly's answer. You weren't listening to me in the previous chapter when I said. An offer you can't refuse? Broly replied with a mischievous smile. His intentions had been made clear, and they weren't exactly peaceful, so everyone, except Fo Shiranui, become ready for imminent battle. A battle they never expected to carry out, a survival battle against a being from another universe who wanted to kidnap them, precisely when they had come to rescue a friend from a possible kidnapping. I don't know what you want us for, if you're really who you say you are, or if I'm really the protagonist of a shonen manga. But if you think we will let you take us without resistance, you are really wrong. Medaka shouted with strength and determination, demonstrating who was the protagonist of this manga, while Zenitsu and Kamagawa also took a fighting position near Medaka. Medaka. Guys, Najimi muttered, quite shuddered. This Broly was a being who transcended his knowledge and logic. Someone who had managed to hurt Aikiko and who seemed to know more about them than themselves, someone who seemed impossible to defeat despite having 12,858.051.967.633.863 skills. Hahaha, as I expected. They speak for you, Goddess Najimi? Broly asked, detaching a little from his fighting aura, intimidating the three members of the student council who, despite receiving the pressure, didn't step back. Aura that made Najimi start to shake as if she was facing the same death, and Ihiko was smiling like a fucking crazy psychopath, due to the prelude to a good fight. Well, I think we have no choice, Najimi said as she thought about how to escape with the other three from here. I see, it's a shame, Broly said, not feeling sorry at all. Gee. Bomb. Due to the provocation and lack of attention of Broly towards Ihiko, he decided to also show his fighting power to intimidate him. It is fresh and logical that if you are looking for strong people, you are interested in the great Shihi Mihiko, the unique existence, the legendary hero who has lived for over 1,000 years. It is logical that you also want someone like that equalist. After all, it is someone who has lived longer than me, even if he is unable to defeat me, but I can come to understand why you are interested in Najimi's favorite toy and that boy without presence. I can even understand why you might be interested in Han's ode, which is destined to be my new recipient. But, that mosquito with glasses that has disguised himself as a human? Are you putting them in the same as me when you said, people with extraordinary skills? Are you underestimating me just for hitting me once? Ihiko shouted, pointing at Zenikichi and brandishing a piece of metal that had been broken earlier, which he wanted to use as a weapon against Broly. Foo. Plim. However, that piece of metal that in Ihiko's hands should be a weapon of mass destruction, something more dangerous than a nuclear bomb, a sword millions of times higher than Excalibur, was stopped easily by a nail of Broly. What the? Ihiko said with stupefaction and some fear. He couldn't understand that once again Broly had been able to stop his attack, especially when he was using something like a normal weapon and had attacked with all his strength. What kind of skill does this guy have? What kind of skill does this guy have? Come on, Ihiko, don't be offended like that. It was not my intention to underestimate you. But you shouldn't underestimate them either, especially the last two you mentioned. Since they are the two who were destined to kill you. Didn't you know that the mosquito is the animal that kills more humans in the world? You shouldn't underestimate them, Broly said, raising a manga of Medaka box to Ihiko's face, precisely the chapter in which he is defeated by Shiranui and Zenikichi, and his own power, showing each page at a pace that he could see his own defeat. Impossible. Ihiko shouted, refusing to believe what was seeing or experiencing, so he threw the metal bar from his hand and attacked Broly with his two strengthened hands/claws. Palm. However, Broly stopped them with both his arms, grabbing Ihiko's arms while he was still carrying Shiranui, which cursed the world in every shake, but to his surprise she was not even receiving a scratch or sequel from this fight. Broly and Ihiko continued to struggle, destroying the ground with each increase in pressure, and with each increase in pressure it became more evident who was being the winner of that struggle. Not bad, you are one of the beings with a satellite physical power satellite more powerful that exist. It's a shame to have to finish this so soon, but as is said in my country, en occasions hay que coger al toro por los cuernos, at that moment Broly, who was still struggling with Ihiko with both his hands occupied. Clap. Clap. Ah! Two more arms came out of his shoulders, which greatly shocked Shiranui, who was a few inches from one of the emerging arms, making her scream in surprise and disgust. Multiplication of arms? But Ihiko didn't have time to be surprised by the useful skill of Tenshinhan's, that he only used once in Dragon Ball. Because instantly those two extra arms grabbed him from his ogre's horns and... Bomb! Broly turned his head almost by breaking his neck, which made him lose his balance, making it easier for Broly to open a crater by hitting him on the ground. It can't be. Ihiko is being subdued like a small animal, Shiranui muttered, who could almost see in the first person as the person she feared most, and that until a few minutes ago he had the ownership of her life, had been torn down and could not stand up. And all this happened in less than a second in which no one was able to react. Impossible. How can he be so strong? Why is none of my skills working on him? It has been fun to play with you, but if I keep giving you favoritism, the others will be jealous, Broly said, sketching an evil smile as he began to devour Ihiko towards the Formless Realm, creating great fear in the monstrous ex-hero. Don't. 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 This can't be my end. It will not be. Ihiko, which was halfway missing, which was slowly being devoured by Broly's dimension, lifted the only one of the eyes that remained intact towards Shiranui with a malevolent smile. He. Wah. No. This cannot be happening. Your next line will be impossible. Why am I unable to possess Hansode's body? What the hell have you done to me? Broly said, doing a JoJo pose, but still holding him with his four arms. Impossible. Why am I unable to possess Hansode's body? What the hell have you done to me? What? Ihiko exulted with despair and bewilderment. The answer is... I will not tell you. XD. Sweet dreams Ihiko, see you later, Broly said with a smile as he watched Ihiko disappear without even being able to curse the person who humiliated him for the first time in 50 years. Until he disappeared completely. I can't believe it. Shirani said with horror and relief. Ihiko, his greatest threat so far, had disappeared, but they didn't know what would happen to them in case Broly thought to do the same. She had no right to be relieved. Ha ha ha. Don't worry little girl, that bad man won't try to possess you again. Sorry if you got dizzy with so much quick struggle, Broly said as he stroked Shiranui's head with one of his four arms, as if she were a small animal frightened by fireworks. Well. Najimi and company. Where were we? I think that. He said as he slowly turned to where his next target was, when suddenly. Fluff. Broly was skewered in the back with a giant screw, which pierced his giant body as if it were a sword. Excuse me, have I interrupted you? Said Kamigawa, who thanks to Najimi's ability and the fact that several arcs ago he eliminated his own presence, could reach behind Broly without being perceived. Bookmaker. This ability is quite problematic, Broly said, examining his impaled chest while Kamigawa, Najimi, Zenikichi, Medaka and Shiranui watched with relief as Broly's hair turned white. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.